You know, if I wanted to kill somebody, I'd take this book and beat you to death with it, and I wouldn't feel a thing.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're having a look at the most notorious psychopaths in history.
Because as we've been talking, there are forces at loose in this country.
Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker. Richard Ramirez brought terror to California in the 1980s. His MO was home invasion, followed by heinous crimes.
The dreadful and indiscriminate crimes caused a wave of fear.
Everybody was scared. Everybody in the county of Los Angeles and Southern California was scared to death.
He boasted about 15 victims, yet there are probably more. Ramirez came from a troubled childhood, as his father was violent and had alcohol use disorder. This likely contributed to his psyche, as did physical brain trauma from the events.
25-year-old Ramirez had begun worshipping Satan in his late teens and would often leave pentagrams at the scene of his crimes.
As well, his cousin Mike was a wartime Green Beret and would sometimes share gruesome photographs with Richard, who claimed he was fascinated rather than offended by the images. In addition to a traumatic childhood, Ramirez showed impulsiveness, criminal versatility, and lack of remorse, all traits on the Hare psychopathy checklist.
Such is his reputation that extra security was set up outside the courtroom, and many spectators crowded around for a glimpse of an accused serial killer.
Albert Fish, aka the Gray Man.
Fish could have easily passed for someone's grandfather, but this was not your average grandfather.
Albert Fish was born in 1870 and was once placed into an orphanage for about 5 years. In the orphanage, he suffered harsh physical punishments, at which point Fish noticed that such violence caused him pleasure.
Fish is regarded by many aficionados of crime as the scariest and most deranged of all American serial killers. Partly I think it was because he seemed so benign.
He found himself fascinated with mutilation after seeing anatomical bisections at a museum. Fish would also attack himself, displaying the tendencies often seen in psychopaths. Fish would capture young people and claimed numerous victims. On the psychopath checklist, Fish would tick off lack of empathy and remorse, as well as impulsivity, among many others.
Those psychiatrists who testified for the prosecution that he was sane were correct, and I think that they were able to support their findings with Fish's own behavior that shows pre-planning, clarity of thinking, and a real awareness that this was something that was illegal and wrong.
Albert DeSalvo, aka the Boston Strangler. Albert DeSalvo took the lives of over a dozen women between 1962 and 1964, in most cases by entering their apartments.
As the number of victims grew, police became more and more frustrated. No woman felt safe.
DeSalvo was initially convicted in late 1964 for a series of crimes dubbed the Green Man attacks.
He invented a routine to con gullible young women, relying heavily on his ability to charm.
In custody, he confessed to many crimes. Much like others on this list, DeSalvo grew up in a problematic home. His father tormented his wife in front of their children. DeSalvo began to mistreat animals at age 12. Forensic psychologist J. Reed Malloy points out that psychopaths tend to devalue their victims. DeSalvo would put neckties on his victims and position their bodies in horrible ways, a form of posthumous devaluation in turning them into displayed objects.
He wanted to be world-renowned. And of course, if you confess to the worst serial murder since Jack the Ripper, you're going to be famous, infamous.
Dennis Rader, aka the BTK Killer. Dennis Rader was convicted of 10 killings that took place between 1974 and 1991. Rader, like numerous others on this list, also displayed typically brutal animal mistreatment in his youth, capturing and killing them. His main motivation was realizing his twisted fantasies, hence the nickname he gave himself, BTK.
In my mind, there was two people in that body. One of them was a husband and father, the Boy Scout leader. The other one was an absolute animal.
He is an unconventional psychopath to some experts, as one of the key traits is lack of acknowledging responsibility for one's actions. Rader sent taunting letters to media outlets and law enforcement, boasting about his crimes.
BTK began today's letter with a question. How many do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national attention?
Though he ticks the grandiose sense of self-worth box, boasting about responsibility separates him from some textbook psychopaths.
He remains in solitary confinement, where he will stay for the rest of his life.
Elizabeth Bathory, aka the Blood Countess. Though her guilt is actually still debated by historians, Hungarian Elizabeth Bathory was a countess who lived between 1560 and 1614 and allegedly took the lives of around 600 young women.
Elizabeth Bathory had a terrible temper, and she enjoyed torturing people. She enjoyed humiliating them.
Many of her victims were sent to her by their families in order to learn proper etiquette, a typical practice at the time. She is said to have bathed in blood in order to maintain her youthful appearance, but this is also highly debatable.
Her sadistic reputation was beginning to strike fear into the hearts of all who heard her name.
You must imagine these people cowering outside the walls of her castles, never knowing what exactly is going on in there, but knowing at the same time that they are absolutely subject to this person's power, to this person's whim.
Bathory reportedly displayed mental health issues from the age of 5 and was exposed to executions and the beatings of servants from a young age. She also displayed obvious disturbed public behaviors in her adult life, watching others suffer for pleasure or harming them herself.
She was allowed to live. She was imprisoned in her castle. That's, what we've been led to believe, and that no one was allowed to talk about her or say her name for 100 years meant that they almost just wrote it out of history.
Vlad the Impaler, aka Vlad III, aka Vlad Dracula.
The story goes that Romania's bottomless well of tyranny, catastrophe, and overall human misery can all be traced back to one terrifying ruler and his supernatural evil.
Vlad III was born somewhere between 1428 and 1431, second son to eventual leader of Wallachia, Vlad Dracul. Recognize that?
And what's the connection between the historical story of Vlad the Impaler and the story that Bram Stoker gave us of Count Dracula?
He's decided to write a book about vampires. So he picked up a guidebook on Transylvania and he found this name, Dracula. And it just sounded so evocative.
Dracul was a member of the Order of the Dragon, a society that opposed the Ottoman conquest of Europe. As a result of this, little Vlad and his brother Radu were taken hostage by Ottoman Sultan Murad II in an attempt to gain Dracul's loyalty. After this ordeal, Vlad's father and older brother were killed. When in power, Vlad had a particular penchant for impaling his enemies and leaving them to die.
To this day, he's still referred to as Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler, in memory of his favorite method of killing.
He was responsible for an estimated 80,000 deaths. Some psychological researchers claimed Vlad fit the dark triad mold, which consists of Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy.
With Vlad, we have a man who didn't care how much blood he spilt. Finally, we have the name, Dracula. Today, it has a deadly sound to it. It means son of the devil. The devil, of course, a horrific, vengeful, impossible to stop creature. And that is exactly the image that we have from the real Vlad Dracula.
H.H. Holmes. Dr. Herman Webster Mudgett, better known as H.H. Holmes, was a career criminal guilty of a number of crimes including forgery, illegal marriage, and causing deaths.
He was apparently very handsome and had an incredible personality, and women were drawn to him in large numbers.
He is best known as the proprietor of the Murder Castle, which was subject to so many sensationalized stories that it's impossible to give an actual account of its layout or events. Holmes's childhood was harsh, as is the case with most of the others on this list.
The middle child of a stern postmaster and devoutly religious mother, he grew up a mummy's boy. He took to science and found confidence designing scarecrows and perpetual motion machines.
His father had alcohol use issues, and he was treated badly by his schoolmates due to his academic proficiencies. Holmes became obsessed with anatomy and dissection, performing the latter on animals. He was convicted of causing only 1 death, but is presumed to have committed 4 more and is suspected of 9.
You are cleansed and delivered. May God have mercy on your soul.
As Holmes waits for his life to come to an end, he remains cool and composed.
Ed Gein, aka the Butcher of Plainfield. Ed Gein was a killer and body snatcher, exhuming and stealing human remains from cemeteries. Gein was born to a militantly religious mother, Augusta. Augusta would forbid her children from making friends, contributing to Ed's poor social skills. The family farm went to Edward upon the deaths of his family members. He reportedly boarded up all rooms used by his mother, leaving them spotless compared to the rooms in which he lived.
The house became unimaginably filthy with layer upon layer of waste, slop, and unidentifiable clutter.
Gein was eventually discovered to have fashioned a long list of objects from human body parts. For example, skull bowls and a skin lampshade.
They found all types of things that belonged to people that were no longer people.
Gein was diagnosed with schizophrenia and also psychopathy.
There's no way in the world that anyone could ever decipher completely or even intelligently what Ed was thinking or doing.
Charles Manson.
Tell me in a sentence who you are.
Nobody.
Charles Manson was understandably evaluated a number of times while imprisoned, resulting in various diagnoses such as schizophrenia and personality disorders. After Manson's death, his initial evaluations by psychologist Todd Roy were publicly released, giving other professionals the chance to weigh in.
What we learned from Manson is how somebody can be affected to a point of having psychiatric problems and still be charismatic and manipulative enough and have enough going on upstairs to plan and organize two massacres.
More modern researchers claimed Manson was more on the bipolar spectrum, displaying psychopathic, narcissistic, and antisocial behaviors.
Are you mad? Do you feel like Manson?
attracted followers easily, a sign of grandiose self-worth as seen on the hair checklist. His Rorschach test answers were apparently consistent with under 1% of comparable results. He also came from a troubled childhood with a neglectful mother, unstable father figures, and time spent in a boys' school where he was beaten for the smallest infractions.
There was no reason to say that Charlie's early life as a child was ideal. Having your mother in prison never is.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Ted Bundy.
He was sharp. You couldn't put anything over on him. He liked to play games where he'd make us look like fools, like he was dealing with inferiors. Just simple, low-life, country bumpkin deputies.
The infamous Ted Bundy confessed to dozens of horrific crimes between 1974 and 1978.
Bundy confessed to all 8 Seattle killings and 15 more in Oregon, Utah, and Colorado. He gave police information on dozens of other unsolved cases.
Though recollections of his childhood are scattered, with differing stories from different people, including Bundy himself, it is seemingly the case that he never had a clear father figure. He was made to believe his grandparents were his actual parents and his mother his sister.
From an early age, Ted sensed he was living a lie.
The truth clearly marked him in some way. Bundy was initially diagnosed a psychopath by prominent psychiatrist Hervey Cleckley in the late 1970s, yet has subsequently also received many other psychiatric diagnoses and designations. Bundy had a successful mask of sanity. He could easily charm his victims into trusting him.
He graduated in June of '72 from the University of Washington with a degree in psychology.
Why does he get a degree in psychology? From my view, he does that because he wants to be able to continue to manipulate people.
Is there a psychopath in history that should be on this list? Let us know in the comments.
Did you like feeling evil?
No, I didn't. But I had tried to overcome the thoughts, and it worked for a while, but eventually I gave in.
Check out these other clips from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.